Alright guys, today we're going to go over graphite modeling tools in 3ds Max. I want to start out by first saying to come up to your Customize tab, go down to Unit Setup, and just make sure your units are in feet and inches. Typically Max defaults at 2 generic units, so just make sure you select feet and inches and click OK. The other thing I want you to do is under Customize, make sure under Show UI, Show Ribbon has a check mark next to it. If it's off, your 3ds Max display might look like this. So you have to go again under Customize, Show UI for User Interface, and go down to Show Ribbon and turn that on. Now when that is on, this ribbon is here, which has all of my graphite modeling tools, and there's a little drop down here for Show Full Ribbon. So when I drop that down, I can see my graphite modeling tools, my freeform area, my selection area, and my object paint area. So basically within these tabs, we're mainly going to be working today and going through what a few of the things that 3ds Max is capable of within this ribbon, using this to work with geometry within Max. Now you notice as I kind of go through here, there really isn't anything active. So if I go to Freeform, it's just this little defaults button here, and there's nothing here, and that's because we don't have anything in our scene right now, and we don't have anything selected within the scene. So not only is there no geometry in the scene, but nothing is selected within the scene. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come over to my top view. I can also hit, if I'm in just one viewport here, and I come down to my maximize viewport toggle. If I'm just in one viewport, I can hit T on my keyboard to switch it into top view. And I warn you, by using any keyboard shortcuts, you have to make sure this toggle up here for your keyboard shortcuts override is off. Otherwise, when you have certain things selected, it might do odd things in your 3ds Max program when you start to use some of these shortcuts. Just make sure that button is not down, but rather it is up and off. So again, T to get into my top view, and I'm just going to come over to my Create panel here, and I'm going to go and hit Plane, and just drag and create a plane on my screen. Now I can hit W on my keyboard, which will bring up my Move gizmo. I can also come up here to select a move and just turn that on. And with that on, I can then grab this guy and move it around. Now if I want to see the divisions of this plane, I can hit F4 on the keyboard to turn the divisions on and off, or I could hit F3 to turn the shading on and off. I can also, if I want to turn the grid off in the background, hit G on my keyboard to turn that on and off. So with this in shaded mode and with my edges on, I can go into my Modify panel over here, which is right next to the Create panel. And what I'm actually going to do is give these length segments something like 25 and the width something like 25 as well, just so the surface is much more divided. Now if I hold my Alt button on the keyboard and I click the middle button on the scroll wheel on my mouse, I can drop it down into an orthographic view. And again, I'm going to turn off my grid by hitting G. And if I hit Z, it actually zooms that object into my viewport. So if I'm over here, when I pan around into it with that object selected, if I just hit Z, it brings me right up to it. And what I actually do is put an Edit Poly modifier on top of this plane. To do that, I can just click the drop down list here, my modifier list, and click on Edit Poly. If you want to make that a little bit quicker, instead of grabbing the list and finding Edit Poly within the list and then adding it on top, I'm going to delete this off right here by clicking the button. What you can do is you can actually right click the modifier list and do Show Buttons. Once your buttons are showing, you can right click on the modifier list and click Configure Modifier Sets. Now when you do that, it pulls up your buttons here on the right. And if I go through my list, like if I find myself using Edit Poly all the time, I can come over to Edit Poly, which is here on the list, and I can just click and drag it into place. For example, symmetry, say I'm not using that very much, and I actually want to do like FFD 4x4x4. I can click, drag this over, and drop it on top. And you can see over here where it says symmetry, as soon as I click OK, it changes to FFD 4x4x4. So instead of grabbing these things from the drop-down list, if I find myself using it all the time, I can just hit these buttons and it'll add it. And it's just the same thing coming from the modifier list, it's just a quicker, faster way of doing it. Now what I want to do is I actually want to come into my Graphite Modeling tools over here, and I want to go into my vertex sub-object level by clicking this button here. I can also hit 1 on the keyboard, which is the toggle on and off for it, and max is actually set up to be 1 through 5, so that 2 is actually the edge, 3 is the border, 4 is the polygon, and 5 is the element. And you can access them here in the modify panel, you can access them here in the Graphite Modeling tools, or you can just use your keyboard toggle by hitting 2 for edge, 3 for border, 4 for polygon, 5 for element, and it just goes through that list. We want to be in vertex, and we want to use soft selection, which is this little button right here, and it actually gives you a diagram there showing that if you just have one point selected and you pull it up, it only affects that point, but with soft selection it does it based on a certain fall off amount, which you can actually control here, or you could also control it again within this modifier panel, coming over to the soft selection area, which is here, and I'm just going to click the banner to expand it, and then when I have one of my points selected, you can see it kind of gives me that's the area that is being affected by this. So if I actually increase this fall off some, you can see that area is increased. Or if I increase the pinch value of it, you can see it's much more pointed, and it kind of gives you a profile here to just kind of give you a rough idea of what it's going to do. So you can see when that pinch value goes up, it's a lot sharper. If I turn it down to 0 and I undo that move, again turn that down to 0, and then pull this up, you can see it's a much more subtle and soft curvature being applied to the plane. I want to grab another point here, and I want to drop this down, and I want to grab another point here and drop this down, and I want to grab another point here and pull this up, maybe like this, and we'll grab one more point and pull this really high, just so I have some kind of different areas in terms of high and low on this piece of geometry here. Alright, so the first thing I want to go over is actually in the selection panel. And you've noticed now that I have a plane and edit poly on top of it, all of these areas in my Graphite Modeling tool is now active, meaning that when I'm within it, there's all the different options. Now if I were to go back down to my plane, for example, you see all of those options disappear from my window as soon as I go down to plane within the modifier list. When I go back up to edit poly, they all reappear again, because the edit poly is the key to making these elements active. If you're not within an edit poly, then it's not going to be an active element. For example, if I add another modifier on top of this, like subdivide, to divide the surface up, you see that all of those elements again go away because there's no edit poly on top of it. I would have to put an edit poly on top of my subdivide if the subdivide is something that I need. So you always need to have the edit poly there, you know, when you're working with these Graphite Modeling tools. Otherwise you're not going to be able to work within the Graphite Modeling tools ribbon. And what's also nice is whenever you're working within that, since it's tied to that edit poly, you can actually turn these things on and off. So as I'm making modifications, if I don't like something, say I do something here, then I do my subdivide, then I do my edit poly, and I have something tied to this edit poly. If I don't like it, then I can just delete that edit poly, or turn it off, and that takes me back to my geometry before I apply that edit poly. So you can think of it kind of like layering the stack in terms of putting stuff on top of each other and having the ability to go backwards and forwards. I can also right click here and rename this and call this like push period pull points, just so that I know that that modifier, that edit poly modifier, was me pushing and pulling a few of those points on the surface. Now, first thing I want to show you is in the selection tools, but as soon as I go to selection tools, you see there's a problem here. Nothing is active, and that's because I just have my one object to select in the scene, and that's it. Now, if I actually want to make the selection area active, I have to go into one of my sub objects levels here. So I want to go into the polygon level, and I can hit 4 on the keyboard, or I can click the polygon level here, or I can go back to my Graphite Modeling tools and click on the polygon sub-object level here. So if I go back to selection tab here, the first thing I want to show you is you can actually select the surface based on its curvature. So if I go with a convex curvature and I actually begin to dial this up, you can see anything that's actually popping out of the surface is being selected. So if I'm working with my geometry and I need to go through and select based on the curvature, I can do it based on convex or concave curvatures. And as soon as I start to crank these values based on my geometry, it'll begin to select those areas of the surface based on the curvature, whether it's concave or convex. The next is actually by the normals. You can see there is a Y, an X, and a Z axis. And if I come in here and I actually say, okay, within 90 degrees of the Y, what it's doing is it's saying anything within that within that range that is facing the Y-axis. So you can see the Y-axis is in this direction here. It'll grab those faces and select it. If I switch it to the X, and I think I have to adjust the value, yeah. So as soon as I adjust the value to 90, you can see it then changes and switches directions, and now it's anything facing in this direction of the axes of my shape. So if I start to crank this number up, you can see the effect is basically more of it gets selected. So anything within 135, you can see it's almost all of my geometry. If I go down to 45, you can see anything within 45 degrees, which is only a few of these shapes, which are pretty extreme in terms of the curvature. So if I went into like my front view, you can see basically that angle is at 45 degrees or more, and that's why it's being selected. So that's just handy if you need to do something based on the axes within your working geometry here. The next thing you can actually do is by perspective, and this is all based on, so I'm going to hit P on the keyboard just to switch into perspective view instead of orthographic. And this is all based on your viewing angle. So if I click this button here, my little arrow, within 30 degrees of my viewing of this piece of geometry, it selects whatever is within 30 degrees of my viewing ratio. I was actually hitting the wrong arrow there. I was doing by random. So I want to do this arrow, which is in the by perspective. So you can see as I rotate around, it's actually changing as soon as I hit that button each time, and it's all based on my viewing angle. Now I could decrease this angle, but you see I don't get anything, and if I increase it, then I should get quite a bit here. Anything relative to 90 degrees from my viewing point, and you can see that's actually pretty much everything. So maybe I drop it down to like 45 and hit select again, just rotating it slightly so you can kind of see the effect of the selection as I rotate it around. Like I said, it's all based on my viewpoint to that piece of geometry. And if I click on outline and click on my selection, what it's actually doing is if I turn that off and click on it, you can see these are the areas that are selected. Now if I click on outline and click selected, what it actually does is it creates a border around the overall geometry that's kind of being selected. So that might be handy if you need to create create something where you're just selecting the edges of the overall area relative to the view that you're working in. The next is actually a pretty handy function if you're just doing something quick and you want to make some modifications to piece of geometry, and you're not exactly set on a pattern, but there's going to be some kind of pattern or tectonic play with your surface. You can actually do it two different ways. Randomly selection within your polygon sub level. You can do it by percentage, or you can do it by a number. If I do it by a number and hit my arrow, it's just going to select 20 of those faces within my geometry. If I do it by a percentage and then hit that arrow, what it's doing is it's grabbing 25% of my overall polygons in that surface. Now, say I have 75% of these selected, so I'll hit the arrow to lock that in, and then I want to take 25% of my 75%. What I can actually do is I can do select within the current selection. So when I do that, it's actually going to give me 25% of the 75%. So you can kind of work quickly within that to get some pretty interesting results. Like I said, if you're going to have some type of random pattern, maybe later on you can figure out exactly what that is based on some script that you come up with, or some algorithm, or whatever it is that you're working in. But if you want something quick, down and dirty for just like a conceptual thing, you can easily generate random selection by coming up here and either doing it by percentage or the number. You can also randomly grow and shrink that selection. So if I click this button, what it's doing is it's just increasing what is selected randomly, or again, if I just do random shrink, as soon as I click that button, it is shrinking that stuff down just randomly. The next thing I want to show you is actually by half, and again, this is based on your geometry's orientation to the axes. So you have your X, again, your Y, and your Z, and if I select half of my geometry based on my X-axis, so this axis here, it selects the geometry in half. Again, I could do it by the Y, and it selects half of it here. And then if I want to, move that half, or I don't know, delete that off, or do whatever, maybe detach it, I can easily just select exactly half of it without having to hit T for top, come into here and do some selection like that. And then, say, well, is that half? I don't know. Maybe, maybe half is that. If I just click that button, it automatically grabs half of it. I don't know if it'll work from the Z. Actually, it will. It'll work from the Z because I've extruded these up and down, so it actually is grabbing basically from the midpoint. If I switch into my front view by hitting F, you can see it's grabbed the bottom half. If I need to invert that and I say, well, I don't need the bottom, it's the other side, there's a little invert axes button right here, and I can just click it and it automatically inverts that selection. Now the other thing that's I want to get out of my polygon sub object, and I'm going to click on the hierarchy here, and I'm going to click on Effect Pivot Only, just so that you can see this blue arrow here, this red and green arrow. That's denoting where my pivot point is located for this object. So you can see it's actually kind of floating in space underneath of my object. And one of the selection tools, if I go back to my Modify tab and go back into the Polygon sub-object, and I'm just going to click anywhere to kind of deselect things. I can do it based on the distance from my pivot point. So if I begin to turn this down, you can see it's actually going in towards my pivot point area. So if I'm at like 50%, for example, you can see basically it's grabbing half of my geometry based on my pivot point location. So the only area that really is unaffected is where the pivot point is. I can also do it from the viewport. I can grow it from the perspective. So if I'm viewing this thing like this, for example, I should expect to see these front corners here begin to be grabbed as I crank this number up. And all I'm doing here is I click and hold over the arrow, and that'll slowly increase it, or if I click and start to drag, it gives you a little up down arrow, and as I'm dragging, it's increasing that value rapidly. So I can easily kind of dial things up and down if I just click and hold and drag this up and down very rapidly. You can see it's just kind of from the viewport. So if I swing my viewport over this way and then start to click up, you can see it's expanding based on my view to that geometry. So if I'm, zoomed in on this hilltop, I would expect to start to grab part of that top of that geometry just because it's based on my viewport. The other thing is, if I have something selected here and I want to try and mirror it around, I should just be able to click mirror by symmetry. So let's say I'm in the X and then I want to mirror it on the X. I don't know why I should. I'm not sure why it's not responding to the mirror axes. Actually, I think it might be based on if I have things. No, it's not doing it either. Maybe if I do it by point layers. Okay, so it might not work in all of the different sub-levels. So right now I'm in the vertex level and I have these selected. I want to mirror it in the Y, and when I mirror it in the Y, I get the other corners selected so that I can, do my manipulation to the geometry as I need to. Or I'm guessing if I'm here and select this corner, instead of the Y, I would do the X, or do I get it? No, that's the Y. So maybe it's the Z? I don't know why that corner wouldn't be selected. For some reason it looks like only the, but then if I come here and select Y, I don't know. Unless it's based on your viewing. No, I go into top. So I don't know why this is kind of selectively working. But in theory, if I select this point and I hit mirror along this axis, it should basically flip over. I've kind of only gotten it to work in this one corner over here to where it's flipping. So I'm not sure why that's not working exactly. The other interesting thing that you can do is you can actually, if I go back into my polygon sub-object over here, you can select by number of faces, and right now we only have, basically all faces have 4 sides to them here. So if I hit everything equal to 4 and I hit select, it selects everything. If I do less than 4 and hit select, it selects nothing. Greater than 4 and select, it hits nothing. So say I want to get some different geometry just kind of within the shape here. Let's basically go over to my Graphite Modeling tools, and I'm going to go into the Generate Topology tool here. And what I'm just going to do is apply a skin to this just to get some different geometry in my shape. And what that does is that takes all of my edges and it repurposes them into this skin kind of pattern. So now if I go back into my polygon sub-object layer here and I go to selection and I come over to anything with more than 4 sides and I hit select, you can see it's selecting all of those things with more than 4 sides, or I could do equal to 4 sides and hit select, and then it's grabbing all of those pieces of geometry. Oops, let me undo that. I was trying to just kind of move these up so you could see. It's grabbing all of those pieces of geometry that have 4 sides on it, and I actually still have my soft selection on, so I can turn it off here, or I can come over back to the Graphite Modeling tools and just unactivate it here. I just kind of wanted to show you these are the guys that I have selected. And those are all the ones that have 4 sides exactly. And if I go back into the selection, maybe I say greater than 5 sides, and you can see these are all the ones that are greater than 5 sides. So that's basically it in terms of the selection tools. There's different ways you can store selections, and there's different patterns that you can do within it. But I mean, really, I would just kind of invite you to explore some of this stuff. But I mean, for the most part, that's kind of the basic basic tools within the Graphite Modeling tools in the selection set. You know, for example, like there's by material ID. I can come in here and say, you know, anything on ID 1, I hit select. Right now everything's on ID 1. So, you know, if I was like doing something with this geometry and I said, okay, everything greater than 5 sides, select. So that's all of these things. I want to change the set ID to 2. And then what I'm going to do is click off of it, so then I can do ID 1, select. So that's everything on 1. And then ID 2, select, and select. And that's everything on 2. So I actually had to click off of it. So if I do 1, select, I have to click off of it and then hit 2, select. So that's everything on ID 2 that I changed, and this is everything on ID 1 that I've changed. So again, there's, you know, some other more advanced, complicated things that you can do within here, but those are kind of the basics of the selection tab within the Graphite Modeling tools. The next thing I wanted to show you is something handy if you have if you're working with this piece of geometry and this is kind of becoming your reference piece of geometry, but you need to you know, mold something else to this geometry. What you can actually do is you can come and create another surface. And you can see it's not exactly matching up with my modifications because it's just perfectly flat. But if I go into my Graphite Modeling Tools Freeform, first thing I'm going to do again is put that edit poly on there so all these things become active. I'm going to come over to the poly draw. I'm going to select draw on surface, pick that under surface, which is plane 01. And then what I'm going to do with this object still selected on top is I'm going to select conform, turn my strength up to something like 200, turn the conform up to something like 10, so that when I click and drag around, what this is doing is it's actually snapping to that surface and kind of molding itself onto the surface. So if I have some manipulations that I've done and it's like, okay, I need to make some other surface to do some other modifications, you know, I can then have this surface, which is kind of my, you know, whatever roof structure or whatever it is, and then I can come over here and work with a piece of reference geometry where I'm actually, you know, conforming it to the first surface so that it's lining up and basically matches with that original surface that I just kind of arbitrarily went in there and just quickly pulled around some points. So you can see that's basically just a handy little tool if you're going into the Freeform you know, tab here. And what you can also do, if I want to take this and then further modify it, there's push-pull within it. There's also relax and soften. So if I go into my relax and soften, I can just adjust the size and the strength and come in here and begin to kind of smooth some of this stuff out so it's not as kind of rough or rigid, you know, so that edge actually becomes just a little bit smoother in here. So there's, you know, there's different tools within kind of the Freeform, but again, it's kind of hard because it's not exactly like it's a precise thing that you're using within the Freeform. That's why I kind of like the conform tool the best, because really if you have some piece of geometry where it's like you're working with it and you have something specific, you can conform this geometry to that and make sure that everything is matching up pretty much as it should. Whereas if you're kind of, you know, smudging things and doing whatever, moving stuff around, adding some like noise to stuff, you know, it's all just kind of arbitrary manipulations that you're doing here. So I don't necessarily like all of these tools within here, but like I said, there's a couple of handy things within here that you can kind of do if you're doing some arbitrary kind of manipulations to your geometry. The next thing I want to actually go over, I'm going to undo some of this stuff. Just Control Z on my keyboard, and I'm going to go into the Graphite Modeling tools, and I'm going to work with this just new piece of geometry here that I have. And to get it kind of out of this whole Freeform thing, I can unclick it, or if I'm within it and I hit Q on the keyboard, it takes me actually up to my select object, that's the shortcut for select objects. So it just kind of clears me out of that mode that I was in before. And I come over to Graphite Modeling Tools, and I want to show you some just some quick modeling things in here. If I switch into perspective by hitting P and Z, just kind of zoom in a little bit on the object. First thing I want to show you is that you can actually control the smoothness of your object with a couple of these just kind of like handy modifier things here. So you see if I hit hard and hit F4 so you guys can see a little bit better, it's not smoothing that object at all. All it's really doing is just showing you the flat panelization of that surface. If I hit smooth with it selected, you can see Max is actually beginning to interpolate between those surfaces and smooth it out and give it more of a smooth surface, kind of similar to like a NURB surface within Rhino. Or I can kind of do like a half and half, and for this surface you really don't see kind of that effect, but on certain surfaces, if you have some extreme geometries, based on that angle of your geometry, it'll smooth to a certain point, and then anything beyond that it does not smooth. So I'm just going to leave it in hard for right now and hit F4 to switch back to that wireframe kind of mode here. And what I want to show you here is actually something called Swift Loop. So if I click on Swift Loop, what this is doing is this is going to allow me to come in here and break up this geometry. So if I actually zoom in here a little bit, as you can see, as my cursor moves along this edge, it's basically creating a new section cut for me at that point. So if I click, it creates that cut. And again, if I click here, it creates that cut. So if I'm along this edge here, it's going left to right, and if I switch it to the other edge, it's then, you know, well, I guess I should do it like this probably. So this edge is left to right, and this edge is kind of up and down. So I can come in here and start to, you know, add some variation into my surface. And again, I'm just kind of doing this arbitrarily. But if you need to kind of quickly slice something up, it's a very handy tool to kind of have accessible if I need to add some variation and make this just a little more non-regular in terms of my geometry and just the way my geometry is looking. So I kind of have that now as my surface that's kind of sliced up a little bit more, just with some more dense, you know, more denser areas and less dense areas in terms of cutting it up some. The next thing that I want to show you is actually Repeat, which is a very nice tool if you need to repeat some commands. So let's say I actually go into, get on my edge, and I'll go into my polygon sub object. I go into selection, I just want to grab, click my drop down, click select 25% of my objects here. And I come back into Graphite Modeling Tools, and I'm going to get out of that Swift Loop. And what I want to do is click on my extrude and click on my extrude settings, and I'm going to extrude by the polygon, and I'm just going to do something, I'll just drag it till it looks good here. So we'll say like 4 inches, something like that. Okay, now say I come in here and I say, alright, you know, that looks alright, I got some funky whatever extrusion is going on here. You know, but I want to add this one and this one to that same extrusion set. Now, rather than coming in and extrude and trying to remember exactly what I entered in and entering in again, because I just kind of dragged arbitrarily, if I had just done that command, I can hit repeat, and it basically will repeat that last command, and I can do that to my heart's content and just kind of say, okay, well, maybe a few here and maybe a few here, and just add these guys in here as I need to. The next thing I want to actually show you is actually, is it the relax settings? I can show you relax. Well, I'll show you. I'm actually going to show you the mesh smooth here. So say I can have some surface and it's you know, just all kind of blocky. If I actually go into my mesh smooth modifier here on my list, you can see it begins to take that geometry and smooth it out. Now, of course, I'm going from, you know, a very hard, rough box to kind of this rounded geometry. And so it's kind of trying to interpolate that. Everything in between, on the regular surface looks pretty good, but all of those boxes are pretty rough. So if I increase the number of iterations here, you can see it actually increases the smoothness of it. So again, if I'm kind of working with my geometry, I never really want to do anything too extreme as I'm working with that piece of geometry, because I can always come in and later just at the end drop on a mesh smooth to kind of smooth things over and give it a really nice, kind of crisp looking, rounded, curved, smooth surface, so it's not this rough kind of blocky surface. So if I take that mesh smooth modifier off of there, you can see this is just a very rough surface. So I'm not kind of too concerned about that stuff. I want to show you some of the other stuff in terms of modifying this geometry. So if I go back into the polygons, what I can do is actually a bevel, and if I hit Z here, it zooms to what I have selected. And when I go to bevel settings, if I actually extrude this up with that top number, the bottom number is then the inset of it. So if I inset this guy in here so that it's something like that, and click OK, you can see if I put something like a mesh smooth on it now, that geometry, when I go to the second level, is actually, and actually I have to deselect the polygon, because what it's doing here when I have the polygon selected, it's only affecting that area. So I want to deselect that and then go up to my mesh smooth modifier, just so I can see the effect on that. But if I want to do that same modification, I would go back into the polygon sub-object here, and again I could just hit repeat up here and have that same operation repeated on these different guys without actually going into that bevel again and trying to do some stuff. Now let's say I have some other object here, and actually go into my top view, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a box, and just kind of create this box here, and I'm going to create another box over here, and again if I hit F4, it's toggling on and off my lines, because I want to go into my modify tab and give this some length, some divisions here. Also give this some divisions here. I'm actually going to increase the height of this guy, and we'll increase the height of this guy too, and we're just going to line these two kind of up here. The next one I want to show you, I got to drop an edit poly on this. Within my edit poly modifier, I can actually attach different things, and I can attach from a list of objects. So if I attach from a list, it'll pull up my objects here, and I can select that box, or I can click attach and then click on the box. So now these two objects are basically one and the same. Now that they're one and the same, I say okay, maybe I want to do some bridge connection between these two different things. On the polygon sub-objects, I can come into the polygon sub-objects, I can come into my bridge modifier here, and click on the bridge settings, and what I can actually do is select one polygon here, select another one here, and that's automatically going to bridge across those two pieces of geometry. And I can kind of come in here, there's different values, there's a twist value that I can control, so if I crank this up, you can see it's actually beginning to twist, and it's based on your two objects. So this is actually your first polygon, and that's your second polygon. So based on how you want to twist it, you can also kind of give it like a bulge, I believe, in the middle. If it's, I don't think it's that number. That's taper. That's rotation, segments. So if I give it, I think I have to give it segments, and then it's going to let me bulge or not. I don't know why it's not. I should be able to control its rotation. There it is. So I had to basically give it a certain amount of segments, and then I can actually control the bulging of that object. and I can kind of click accept here, and then if I want to then take maybe bridge from here to here, again I can just kind of click on my bridge settings, or I can click on bridge itself. You know, maybe I go from like here to here and click on bridge, or go here to here. I'm just, you know, again, I'm just kind of arbitrarily doing this. So I have some proposal where it's like, oh, you know, there's a bunch of connectivity going on here, and you know, some of this is like support structure. Maybe this guy goes up to these two actually. We bridge something like that, and then I don't know, switch into my perspective so I can see this a little bit better. Maybe we do one more from like here to here, bridge across there, something like that, and then one last guy here to this bottom corner. Now you might be kind of careful, because I think if you do like from here to here, for example, I don't think it's going to like that too much. It's actually flattening it out and trying to go through the geometry. So you know, you want to try and stay somewhat you know, somewhat coplanar with your two objects. You don't want to get too far out of whack if you have something you know, on the other side of the building that you're trying to bridge across. And again, if I get out of this sub object, you can see this is kind of really rough here. But what I can do is just come in here and again at the very end put on that mesh smooth to kind of, you know, smooth out my things if I'm going for some kind of morphological form here, just so I have something a little bit, you know, smoother and kind of cleaner. So I got like this spider web of connectivity coming across my two, you know, building shapes here. And if I don't want it to affect, again, any of these other shapes, I should be able to come into my top view, and I'm going to turn off show end result, and what I want to do is just kind of select all this geometry within here, and I should be able to, I don't know if it's not letting me, so it's still affecting the whole thing. Apply to whole mesh. Alright, so if I turn that off, it's not really liking that too much. But I can kind of selectively, you know, smooth these things out. I think the issue is where it connects here, it's kind of really freaking out on me. But if I turn off apply to whole mesh, I can kind of selectively smooth just that section out. So if I'm kind of building some diagram, I can still keep this fairly rough. But what I would probably recommend is you actually take that modifier off. You come into this object level here and come down to detach and break this guy off. So there's a detach button within your stack that you can click on, and as soon as I click on this, it detaches it. And if I wanted to, if I hit Control Z and undo that, if I want to control the name of it, there's a little settings tab next to it, so I can actually click on that and give it a name if I wanted to type a name for it. When I get out of here and then come in here and put on my mesh smooth, it should just affect those objects, and my other objects are kind of clean, but you see then you get the issue of kind of that, you know, that hole kind of being taken out of it. But if I come in here and I should be able to take off this edit poly, and you can see it kind of filled that in. So what I really should have done at the beginning of this was put another edit poly on top of this before doing all of my bridging, and then I could have deleted that edit poly off so that I had a solid form with these two forms connected. So basically I would have had another edit poly within there, and then when I turn that off, you can see basically what this one is doing is these guys are getting filled in because I'm just taking that edit poly off. So I would have had one more edit poly in there just to take those guys, you know, back to their original forms. So that's kind of really all I want to show you in terms of some of the stuff up here. There's some other stuff you can play around with. You know, there's the mesh smooth that you can access from up here. There's also a tessellate feature, which I can come in here and, you know, begin to divide this up by the polygon or by the edges, and, you know, give it certain value to kind of you know, adjust my geometry and adjust how this is is tessellating. Now I have the mesh smooth here, so what I would actually have to do is put like an edit poly on top of that, and then I could come in and do that same like tessellation, for example, and I could, oops, not want to do that. I can do the tessellate settings, do it by polygon, you know, and kind of break it up like that. I could also come in here and I could do that same topology trick here by hitting generate topology, and when I do that I could do like you know, like skin to it, or if I want to just kind of divide it up into like an even you know, kind of webbing, and you know, maybe I'm okay with something like that. You know, I like the way that looks, kind of like a Chinese finger trap, or you know, whatever. You know, so some of those things are accessible up through this menu. You know, say I then take this and just kind of one last step here. I'm going to go back into my polygon sub level, and I want to take these surfaces and inset them. So this is under the polygons, and I'm going to do it by polygon, and I just want to inset these guys. We'll say 2/8 of an inch. I mean, you know, my scale is kind of off here because I'm just doing this arbitrarily. But I'll click accept. Now with kind of all that stuff selected, what I want to do is come down to my material ID, which is here, and I want to set the ID to 2. With that ID then set, again, make sure your keyboard toggle is off, because this would definitely screw you up if your keyboard toggle is on up here. I hit Control I for the inverse selection, and I want to set that ID to 1 and hit enter. So I kind of have 2 different IDs on this surface, and then what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to hold shift, drag this over here. I'm going to make a reference of that surface and click OK. So now you can kind of see this is my original surface with my original stack. If I click this, this is a new surface, and it has a gray bar here, and that gray bar is denoting the break in the modifier stack. So if I come to this guy, and I'll do a volume select, and with the volume select I'm going to select my faces, and I want to select it by material ID. So I'll do material ID 1, and then I'm going to grab my modifier list here and do delete mesh. So right now all I'm seeing here is my kind of glass panels, if you will. And then what I can do is come over here, and again I'm going to hold shift, click over, drag, create a reference, click OK. And again you see that break here. I'll do a volume select by face, come down, do material ID number 2. And then I'm going to come in here and do delete mesh, and then I'm going to put a shell modifier on this just to give it a little bit of thickness here. So you can see now my geometry has some thickness. You know, maybe that's a bit much, an inch. So I mean, again, this is kind of all arbitrary. So maybe I do like 1/2 inch, something like that, and we'll just leave the segments at 1. Now say I want these guys to kind of line back up. I'm going to quickly select this object and just select my color here and just change it to blue, just so you guys can see the difference in here. And then if I click here and I try and drag this over and line this up, I can do it just roughly. There's also a nice little align tool here, and if I click and hold, I can come up here and click the align, and when I click on it, it gives me the options. How do I want to align this? X, Y, and Z is fine. Pivot to pivot. I click OK. And I can see this is actually you know, lined up with my geometry. And then what I can actually do is make sure that my glass is selected, which it is, and make sure I have an edit poly modifier on top of that. I want to make sure that's the hard smoothing, and that I have no smoothing groups kind of on that. And then I want to come in, select this, and put an edit poly on top of it. And then what I want to do is put a mesh smooth on top of that. And I actually don't want to do it through my graphite modeling tools, because I want to be able to kind of go back and forth. So I'm actually going to do it through my modifier stack over here. So I'll put a mesh smooth on here, and what I'll do is I'll switch it to classic, And I'm going to adjust my strength level over here to like, well, I don't know, like 0.2, just to kind of smooth these out. And if I get out of that wireframe mode, you can see it's kind of a little bit better now in terms of how that is looking, how that is smoothing out. I could crank up the iterations if I wanted to, but you know, I'm fairly happy with it. If, you know, if I crank it up too high, my computer will start to kind of become unresponsive. You know, if I go too high or too crazy with the mesh smooth, I usually try and drop another mesh smooth on top of it if I need to. But if I can, you know, I try and avoid that. But you know, I think everything's looking pretty good here in terms of how this is looking. And that basically does it. I mean, that's the basic rundown of the graphite modeling ribbon and some of the different things you can kind of access through it and different things you can do. One of the nice things, by the way, about this being set up as a reference, I just want to quickly say this before I go here. If I come back to this original shape and say I go into my edit poly and go into the vertex level, and I actually begin to grab some of these points. This might take a second for my computer here. I want to get this guy in view. If I start to modify this, so say I drag this up here. Now it's kind of, you know, taking a little while because I have the mesh smooth and all that stuff. But as I drag that up, you see this object automatically updates. Now if I want to not kind of kill my computer here and get out of the edit poly, I'd recommend coming back and, you know, turning off some of these, like the mesh smooth and some of the other stuff. Like I said, I really only recommend that once you're done doing all your geometry modifications, then you can do that. Because then you can kind of come in, like I said, I just quickly adjusted that and these things automatically updated for me. So it's really nice way if you need to go back into that sub object and make modifications. You know, or even if I come in here and I say, okay, I'm going to go into my polygon layer, and what I want to do is select, I'll just select one of these polygons here, and if I go down and hit select ID 2, that's everything on ID number 2, and I go selection 25%. I'm going to select within the current selection, so it's only within ID number 2, it's selecting 25%, and then I come over, and as soon as I hit delete, I automatically see that update on my reference geometry. So, you know, as I make modifications here, it'll automatically appear on my reference geometry that I'm working with. So it's kind of a very handy tool to kind of have and work with. So that does it. That concludes the first lesson in introduction in this series of workshops.